You are so sweet. You are so sweet.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Y'all come in and find a seat. If you need water or anything, of course, it's out there in the lobby. But we do want to welcome you here for our first ever These Are His Feasts seminar. 16 years ago to the date, we had our first assembly in Huntsville, Alabama. March 24th, 2002, we came together because Yahweh sent us to North Alabama and we assembled. And I think it's awesome that March 24th, 2018, we're doing the same thing. We're having a first meeting for His feast. So thank you all for coming. We're here as He commanded, not just on March 24th, but on His Sabbath day, the day that He set apart, that He called holy. He doesn't take it lightly that you came to observe His day, to declare with Him that this day is a delight. We come with full expectation that He is in our midst. He said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there. So we expect Him to do His word and to be here with us this morning.
Yeah.
We're here to learn the fear of Yahweh, to keep all the words of His Torah, and to do His statutes. So we thank Him today that as we are here, that He will teach us even more about the mysteries of His kingdom, concerning especially His faith. So as you engage your faith today, I ask you to say this with me. Say, having eyes to see.
Having eyes to see.
I see.
I see.
Having ears to hear.
Having ears to hear.
I hear.
I hear.
Having a heart of understanding.
Having a heart of understanding.
I understand.
I understand.
So if you'll pray with me.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Look at you. Got one brave enough to sit on the front row, but look at you. I am so excited that you chose to be here today. You chose to honor Yahweh's Sabbath. You chose to spend time studying His feast, His holy days. That is we may as well say it, that's a rare thing. And excuse me, I lost my glasses. I was trying to find those. I want you to know that I understand that our time here together is a precious thing, because not everybody has the desire that you have exhibited here today to come and spend the Sabbath studying the Word. Matthew 13, the disciples, you can turn there if you like. Are you ready for the Word?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. In Matthew 13, the disciples asked Messiah why He spoke to people in parables. And His answer is a little bit surprising. Listen to what He said in verse 14. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing you shall hear, and shall not understand. And seeing you shall see, pardon me, and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. Messiah said that He spoke to them in parables because their hearts had thickened and become calloused. He said their ears were dull of hearing. Literally, that phrase means that they considered listening to Him teach truth seemed like a burden to them. It was too much effort. It took too much effort to listen to what He had to say. So they just quit listening. And then He said their eyes, they closed. They shut their eyes down. There are vast multitudes of people who fit that description. And we're not here this morning to criticize them or to elevate ourselves. But we do need to acknowledge that there are very many people who claim to be Bible believers whose hearts are calloused, whose ears are dull, and whose eyes are shut. They're happy with their religion, and when there's a conflict between what's written and what they believe, they, without hesitation, choose to reject the commandments of Yahweh that they might hold to the teachings and the doctrines of men. But that's not true of you. And really, if we were being honest, we'd say it's not true of us anymore. If we were honest, we'd admit that used to be us. There were a time, how many of you have got excited you're reading the Bible and you get excited because you see something and it's like you've seen it for the first time? It's evidence to us that we had closed our eyes at some point, that our hearts were calloused. It took too much effort to know some of this stuff. Our ears were dull of hearing. So I'm thankful that we're not there now. And I'm thankful that you're here today to study the Word. Come on in. Welcome. You made an effort to be here because you want to know the truth and you want to learn, keep, and do what Yahweh says. In Matthew 13, Messiah says of people like you, verse 16, "But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear." So knowing that to be true, I'm sincerely grateful that you're here. I want to express my gratitude to the Assembly of Yahweh this morning here in North Alabama. Amanda shared with you its 16th anniversary, but I want to express my gratitude to them. When the idea of presenting this seminar was put before them, they embraced it wholeheartedly. They gave cheerfully and generously to pay for the venue, to pay for printed materials, and to provide lunch. We had it in our heart to make sure that we had lunch and it wouldn't cost anybody anything. And they gave consistently and diligently until once a budget was presented to them, they gave until they exceeded that budget. I never cease to be amazed at their faithfulness to Yahweh and His kingdom. So thank you, Assembly of Yahweh. We appreciate it very much. But we're here to talk about Yahweh's feast. And in this session, what we're going to do is talk about why we should keep Yahweh's feast. And we need to talk about that because, as I said, a vast majority of people do not believe that they should or that they have to. And if you believe that we should, as I do, then understand we're just in the minority. We're not in the majority, we are in the minority. The vast majority of people look at them as if they should be avoided at all costs. As if it's offensive to Yahweh, a sin against Him to keep them. But we're going to see in the Scriptures that that's not so. If you want to get a mental grasp, I want to say this as a preface. If you want to get a mental grasp of on how dark things are and on how deep I think the deception is that has gripped the world and gripped the church, those who call themselves by that title church, and there are many denominations who make up this conglomeration known as the church, when most of them are presented with the pagan practices of Mithraism and Saturnalia and the pagan rituals of the Druid priests, they looked at all of those practices, they looked at all of those rituals, and they said yes to them. They opened their hearts and their doors to decorated cedar trees, to the idea of a sun god being born on December the 25th, to mistletoe, to wreaths, to Santa Claus. And they said in their heart, we will adopt that festival. We will make adaptations to it so that we can participate in it. And they declared December the 25th to be the birth of the Messiah, even though it's not so. Which makes no sense because it's impossible to teach truth using lies. You agree with that? It's impossible to teach truth using lies. They say it's not true. They say we know it's not true. We know that He wasn't born on December the 25th, and we know that the tree, and we know that the lights, and we know that the mistletoe, and we know that the wreaths, and we know that the holly have absolutely nothing to do with Him, but it's fun, and we can use it to reach the lost with the gospel. But you cannot use it to reach the lost with the gospel because you can't teach truth using lies. But here's my point. They brought in the trees, the wreaths, the mistletoe, declaring that the evergreen represents the never-ending love of the one that they call God. And they took all of these pagan practices, they baptized them, and they called them holy days or Christian holidays. And when they were presented with the pagan practices of Tammuz, Nimrod and Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess of fertility, when they saw all of these rituals and practices of those pagan religions, they said yes to. They said yes to sunrise services. They said yes to 40 days of weeping for Tammuz. They said yes to fertility symbols like bunnies and eggs and hunting eggs. And they adopted all of these practices and changed very few things associated with it. They even kept it by the name of that fertility god, which is Ishtar. The difference between the pronunciation of Ishtar and Easter is just the difference between the pronunciation of potato. It's the name of a deity. So they made some minor adaptations. They changed the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz to the name Lent, but they kept the bunnies, they kept the eggs, and they made a huge deal out of the egg hunts. They said, we will make this about the rising of the Son of God instead of the rising of the sun god. And even though it has nothing to do with the resurrection of the Messiah, they have tried to adapt it to make it appear that it does. And now they're doing the same thing with Halloween. And now they're doing the same thing with days like Valentine's. It seems to me that no matter how dark, how demonic, how wicked, how pagan a practice is, the church opens its heart to it and will open its doors to it and adopt it. They will make minor adjustments, and they will make those forbidden practices to be their holy days. But here is where you will see the depths of the deception that's gripped the hearts of men. If you look at it, they've opened their hearts and doors to everything pagan, and there's nothing they will reject, not even the satanic practice of Halloween. But go to them and say, hey, what about the holy days in Torah? And they will, without hesitation, tell you, no, we'll not do those. Those are Jewish. They're not for us. Right? Have you heard that? They recoil and discuss, and they do not see the irony of the fact that they will embrace the most pagan and most satanic of holidays, but the holy days of Yahweh written in Scripture, they want to have nothing to do with it. That is a horrible irony. Peter said that these kind of attitudes in the hearts of people is a result of the work of false teachers and prophets. So let's read that, 2 Peter chapter 2. Verse 1, But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you who privily or privately shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying Yahweh that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. The phrase, the two words, damnable heresies, the word translated damnable there means destructive. The word translated heresy there means choice. So it literally means destructive choices. People are being taught to make destructive choices. It is a destructive choice to reject the commandments of Yahweh and to teach for doctrine the commandments of men, to reject His holy appointed times and embrace the holy days set up by men. The phrase there, pernicious ways, the word translated pernicious there is the same word translated damnable up in verse 1. It means destructive. The word translated as follows means to imitate or to obey. So here's what happens when people begin to make the destructive choice of listening to and obeying and following false teachers. He says the way of truth gets evil spoken of. That's what happens. That's the end result. They will defend their pagan practices with vengeance. They will reject truth and say bad things about truth. They will recoil from it and act as if it is the thing that's vile, and act as if it is the thing that it's offensive. If it's the thing that's got to be avoided. Many have determined that not only should we not keep the feast, but they have determined that it's bondage and sin to do so. But not you. You're here because you have a desire to keep the feast of Yahweh, or at least a strong suspicion that we should keep them. Either way, we should breathe out a thank you to Yahweh.
Yes, sir.
Because we did not come to this conclusion on our own or get this suspicion on our own. Instead, It's because the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, drew us. And had He not drawn us, we'd still be in the bondage of deception that we were in as well. So this morning what I want to do is take a few minutes to share with you why we should keep the Feast of Yahweh. We're going to get into some in-depth study of them later, but I want to talk about why we should keep them. The first reason is found in Leviticus 23, and you may as well mark that, because we'll be going back there several times today. Leviticus 23, verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocation, even these are my feasts. Concerning what now? Go ahead and say it out loud. The feast of Yahweh. Moses, I want you to talk to them about the feast of Yahweh. And then at the end he said, these are what? They're my feast. They're not the Jews' feast. They're not Moses' feast. They're my feast. So the first reason we ought to observe the feast is because they're not Jewish. They are Yahweh's. If you look in verse 2 and take out the italicized words, when you see them italicized, that simply means translators added them. They were not in the original text. They just thought it helped it read better. But if you take out the italicized words, you see how bold and powerful and strong a declaration this is. What Yahweh said is, the feast of Yahweh. You shall proclaim holy convocations. These, my feast. That's strong.
Yes, sir.
He doesn't want us to get confused about who these belong to.
Right.
They are His feasts. He lays claim to them. He makes it clear. He makes it plain they're His. So let's talk about what that means. The word translated as feast is, somebody tell me what Hebrew word that is. Moed. What does moed mean? Appointed time. It's an appointment. The plural form is moedim. You'll sometimes hear us use the word moedim. But the word doesn't actually mean feast at all. Kag means feast, C-H-A-G. Kag means feast, but the word moed means an appointed time. So what Yahweh said here in Leviticus 23 is, I have made some appointments for you to be with me. I want to meet with you, and I want you to meet with me. So why should we keep the appointed feast? Wow! Right there, it says it.
Yes, sir.
Because these are appointments made for us by the Creator of heaven and earth. If Nick Saban was to call you up, even if you're an Auburn fan, if Nick Saban were to call you up and say, I'm going to be coming Thursday, March 29th, 6:30, I want to have dinner with you. There is not anyone sitting here who wouldn't change their entire schedule to make sure they could keep that appointment at 6:30. If we had something planned, we'd call them up and say, hey, I got to cancel. I'm having dinner with Nick Thursday at 6:30, right? We'd mark the date, we'd circle it, we'd take our cell phones and we'd set little notifications so it would remind us so that we wouldn't be late. We would make sure we had our best outfit ready. If we didn't think we had a good enough outfit, we didn't have an Alabama shirt, we'd go buy one. We would make sure that when it was time to meet Him, we were there. The anticipation and the excitement would build day by day as that appointed time to meet Him drew near. Well, how much more?
Right, yes, sir.
The feast, as we call them, are appointments with Yahweh. He created the heavens and the earth. The Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Elohim that so loved us that He gave His only begotten Son. The Elohim who raised Messiah from the dead, He's the one who said, these are my appointments with you.
Right. Amen.
Wow. That's why we ought to keep them. Let me give you another reason. Number 2, He went to great extremes to make sure that it is impossible. Everybody say impossible.
Impossible.
He went to great extremes to make sure that it is impossible for us to miss these appointments. And if He made it impossible for us to miss them, we ought not miss them. Satan and all of his demons and all of his ministers work overtime to try and make sure that we miss them. Satan hates them. And he doesn't want us to know anything about them, including when they are. And he doesn't want us to know anything about them or when they are, because they reveal to us the Messiah. and they reveal to us the work of Yahweh. So he's gone to great extremes to make sure that people know nothing about him. He has his preachers preaching every Sunday, telling people that the law passed away and that they don't have to do what's written in the Old Testament. So even though people have the truth written in a book and in their possession numerous times, numerous copies of Bibles in their possession, they have been taught to ignore it and to reject most of it as being insignificant. Throughout history, Satan also has worked in the hearts and minds of men to get them to forsake the calendar of Yahweh and to create their own.
Right.
Because if he can confuse the calendar, then men won't know when Yahweh's appointed times are. And now most people know nothing about Yahweh's calendar or how it works. All they know is the Gregorian calendar that begins in January and ends in December. And once you start trying to learn about the feast so that you can keep the feast, the first obstacle you have to get past is trying to discover when these feasts are inside that Gregorian calendar, because it doesn't mesh with Yahweh's calendar. Trying to locate the proper times for the feast can be confusing at times. You start studying them and you read in Leviticus 23 that Passover is on the 14th day of the first month. But you shouldn't think that means January, because the world's first month and Yahweh's first month are two different things. And since we did not grow up with any knowledge of his calendar, the majority of people have no idea when the 14th day of the first month is. And then you find yourself trying to wrap your brain around the 14th day of the first month falling on the 29th and the 30th day of the third month, or sometimes the second day and the third day of the fourth month. And so it'll mess with your head, because for all of our lives we have grown up with a different calendar. However, knowing that Satan and men would try to deceive us and confuse us and prevent us from meeting with Yahweh during his appointed times, Yahweh went to great extremes to make sure it was impossible for us to miss them. That excites me.
Amen.
Let me show you what I'm talking about. Go to Genesis 1. Look in verse 14. And Elohim said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. So verse 15 is not the only reason that he put those things in the heavens or in the sky. It's not just for light. Verse 14 says that they are there for signs, seasons, days, and years. The word translated signs means a marker, a flag, a beacon, a monument. So Yahweh put these, the sun, the moon, the stars there as a beacon. Hey! A flag. Okay? And then it says seasons there, and that doesn't mean summer, winter, spring, fall. That is the Hebrew word moed, and moed means what? Appointed times. So the sun, moon, and stars are there for the appointments or appointed times of Yahweh. Let us wrap our hearts around that and consider that for a moment. Satan and men can mess with the calendars and make it as confusing as possible so that Yahweh's appointed times are hidden from the sight of men. But here is the beauty of it. They can't mess with the sun, moon, and stars. If they could, they would. If they could reach them, they would. If they could alter them, they would. But they are out of men's reach. So Yahweh tied his appointed times to the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, which are precise in their movement.
Yes, sir.
Those are timepieces that Yahweh set in the heavens so that you and I would know when his appointments are coming up. They work with amazing, astonishing precision year after year,
Yes, sir.
generation after generation. So one of the reasons Yahweh put the sun, moon, and stars in place is so that they'd be a beacon showing us when to meet with him. That's how to determine that he is how determined he is that those who want to serve him can. That those who want to meet with him can. That those who want to be a part of those appointed times can. Yahweh used the sun, moon, and stars to show how determined he is that we never miss those appointed times. They are a testimony to us of how important the feasts are. Every time you look at the sun, every time you see the moon, every time you see the stars, it should excite you to know Yahweh put those there so that I would never miss an appointment with Him. Wow. That's impressive.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Why keep the feast? Number 3, knowing Yahweh's calendar and keeping the feast is non-negotiable if you want to serve Him. Let me show you what I mean. Go to Exodus 12. Verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you, Hebrew Rosh Hodesh, head month, the beginning of months, it says in the King James. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish. A male of the first year, you shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats. Verse 6, you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. The children of Israel have been in bondage for over 400 years, slaves in Egypt. They have been subject to an Egyptian calendar, and you want to talk about a messed up calendar. Go do some research on that thing. That was one messed up calendar. Yahweh now comes to deliver His people out of bondage, and notice the first thing He does. The first thing He does is reestablishes His calendar for them. He doesn't wait until they are delivered. He doesn't wait till they cross the Red Sea. He doesn't wait until they're at Mount Sinai. He doesn't wait until He's given the 10 Commandments or Torah. He doesn't wait until they cross Jordan and go into the Promised Land. He doesn't wait until they've built a temple in Jerusalem. Before they ever leave Egypt, He reestablishes His calendar with those people. Couldn't it have waited until they were in the Promised Land, or couldn't it have at least waited until they were on the other side of the Red Sea? Evidently not. That's how important it was. And notice that I am saying that He reestablished it. He didn't create it there that day. He reestablished the calendar that day. That calendar's been in effect since the 4th day of Genesis 1, which we just read about. Amen. Now, how do we know it's the same calendar that was in effect in Genesis 1? Let me quickly show you. And then we're going to get into more talking about these feasts. But go to Genesis 7. Genesis 7, look in verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, in the 17th day of the month. Do what? The 2nd month, the 17th day of the month. Drop down to Genesis 8, look in verse 4. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month. Look down in verse 5. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month, in the 10th month on the 1st day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. And so it goes, on and on and on, as it describes the flood, when it came, when the waters came, when the ark rested. Noah was familiar with Yahweh's calendar. He knew when the 1st month was. He knew when the 10th month was. He knew when the 1st day was. He knew when the 17th day was. Yahweh made sure that calendar, established in Genesis 1, was reestablished with His people who have been in Egypt for 400 years under an Egyptian calendar. He made sure they understood, we're about to leave here, but we're leaving here with my calendar. This is Rosh Hodesh, and on the 10th day of this month, you shall do this. On the 14th day of this month, you shall do this. This should make all men to know that in order to serve Him, we have to know about His calendar and about His feast. It's non-negotiable.
Right.
There is no relationship with Him apart from His calendar, which establishes His feast. And somebody might protest and say that's heresy. My relationship with Him is based on the Messiah. But let me please kindly remind those that all of the appointed times of Yahweh are shadows of things to come, and the body is the Messiah. To embrace the feast is to embrace Him. And therefore the opposite of that is also true. To reject the feast is to reject Him. So I stand by my statement that there's no relationship with Yahweh apart from His calendar, which makes known unto us His feast. His calendar reveals to us His feast reveals to us the Messiah. So we have to know about His calendar, and we have to know about the feast. Listen to what Yahweh had Moses say to Pharaoh. In Exodus 5:1, he said this to Pharaoh. And afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, Thus saith Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. Yahweh's command was simple. Pharaoh, you release my people from the confines of your calendar so that they can know me, know my calendar, that we might gather together and meet at my appointed times. So the third reason we keep the feast is because it's non-negotiable. If it wasn't vital and non-negotiable, Yahweh wouldn't have reestablished it before leaving Egypt. It's still the same today. You know, when we're being delivered from the bondages of our own deceptions, when we're being delivered from the bondages of religion, traditions, commandments of men, turning to Yahweh and His Word, it was necessary that we become familiar with His ways. It was necessary that we become familiar with His calendar, His Sabbaths, and His appointed times. You know, there are a multitude of reasons that we should keep the feast of Yahweh, and I've given you 3. I'm going to give you one more, and then we're going to take a break and talk about Passover. The fourth reason that we ought to keep these feasts is they foreshadow the redemptive work of the Messiah.
Yes, sir.
Go to Colossians 2. Verse 16 says, Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day, which is the feast days, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Messiah. Some people read that word shadow and immediately dismiss it as being something insignificant. They even say so. They say, oh, the feasts are just shadows. They're not important. We don't want to focus on the shadow when we have the Messiah. And they say it with disdain, or at least say it dismissively. But we should never think about a shadow as being insignificant. Let me remind you, in Acts 5, we're told that in Jerusalem after Pentecost, sick people were brought out into the streets and laid on beds and couches in hopes that the shadow of Peter might pass over them. Shadow's not insignificant, right? They did not hope that Peter would touch them. They just hoped that his shadow would touch them. You know why? You can't separate Peter from his shadow, and you can't separate his shadow from him. His shadow represents him. Wherever he is, his shadow is. Okay? Wherever his shadow is, he is. Right? Also, let me remind you of Psalm 91:1 that says, He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide where? Come on, where's he going to abide? Under the shadow of the Almighty. Don't tell me a shadow's insignificant. Right. That's a good place to be.
Yes, sir.
Right? Religion wants to scoff at the feast and say we don't need those anymore. They're just shadows. We have the Messiah now. Well, they're not just shadows. They represent Him before He came. They represent Him while He came. They represent Him now. They represent the work He will do in the future. Without them, you cannot correctly identify and recognize who the true Messiah is. Right. They're necessary to recognize Him.
Yes.
We'll get into more of that as we talk about Passover, and Passover particularly, and first fruits. The feast are the shadows revealing to us who's casting the shadow. The feast are shadows that we have to become familiar with in order to fully know who the Messiah is. And notice that statement in Colossians is not in the past tense. It doesn't say they are shadows of things that did come. Right. They are shadows of things to come. And also know this about a shadow. We've just went over it. But your shadow never leaves you. Yeshua's shadow never leaves him. So if you're talking about your shadow, you're talking about him. If you're talking about him, you're talking about his shadow. And further consider this. He has fulfilled 4 of these moedim to the utmost.
Yes, sir.
With precision. They are shadows of things to come. There's still 3 more appointed times to be fulfilled. How ridiculous it would be to believe that he fulfilled 4 of them with exact precision on exact days, and not to believe that he's going to do the same with the last 3.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Not randomly, not haphazardly, but he fulfilled them precisely at exact times that the feast foreshadowed that he would do it. He was slain on Passover. He was buried during unleavened bread. He was raised on first fruits. He sent the Ruach HaKodesh. When did the Ruach HaKodesh come? When the day of Pentecost was what? Fully come. Precision. Wow. Every minute detail of every feast was fulfilled with exact precision. So how can men then be so blind as to think the exact same thing will not be happening with the 3 remaining? No wonder Satan and his ministers have worked so hard to hide Yahweh's calendar, to turn the hearts of men from the feast of Yahweh. They are shadows revealing the remaining work that is yet to be done. We need the shadows. We need them to remind us of what he's already done and what he's yet to do.
Yes, sir.
Let me close with this illustration. If you were to see a shadow at the same time every year and never see the body casting the shadow, but you saw the shadow every year, and not for 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, but you saw that same shadow for over 1,500 years, you would be able to recognize what was casting that shadow once you saw it. Right. If all you saw was the shadow and never saw what was casting it for 1,500 years, you would become so familiar with that shadow, you would know exactly what cast that shadow. If you were to see this every year, just the shadow for 1,500 years, even if you didn't know what an elephant was, even if you'd never seen one in your life, nobody could later fool you into thinking something else cast that shadow. Right. You would be waiting to see the animal that represents that shadow before you'd believe that it was the one that represented that shadow. You might see a lot of different angles of that thing for 1,500 years. Each feast tells us something different about him. Right. You might see different angles, but it would always be the same animal, right? That was casting that shadow. And if somebody were to come up to you after 1,500 years and say, here it is, this is what cast the shadow. If you'd been studying that other shadow 1,500 years, you wouldn't be fooled, would you? You'd say, that's majestic. That's beautiful. That's not what I've been seeing for 1,500 years. They might come and say, well, this is what you saw. And it might take you longer to rule that out than it did the other. You'd say, look at the legs and say, well, that's similar. Oh, no, but that nose is different. Right. Those ears, those are tiny. The thing I've been seeing had big ears. Right?
Yes, sir.
They couldn't fool you into thinking that it was a camel. They couldn't fool you into thinking it was a giraffe. They couldn't fool you into thinking it was a German shepherd. They couldn't fool you into thinking it was a zebra. Right?
Right.
Because you'd been studying that shadow. But if they ever showed you this,
yes, sir,
you'd say, yeah, that's it. That's what I've been waiting to see for 1,500 years. Wow. You'd know. Well, that's what the feast did, and that's what the feasts do. They are the Messiah's shadow. And if you study them, nobody can trick you into believing in a Greek Messiah. Nobody can trick you into believing in some Messiah that has absolutely nothing to do with Torah. If you study the feast, you recognize the true Messiah, who He is and what He did and how He was and what He expects out of us. They reveal Him. If you know the shadow, you'll recognize Him. How did the apostles know that Yeshua was the Messiah? It wasn't because of the miracles or signs or wonders that He performed. Those amazed them. But there can be lying signs and wonders. There was nothing about Him when you saw Him that would make you think, that's Him. How did they know He was the Messiah? Because He perfectly fit into the shadows that they had been studying all of their lives. The feast reveal who He is. The elephant and his shadow will always match. Likewise, the feast and Yeshua will always match. Any celebration of Messiah that does not match the shadow we were shown in Torah is not the true Messiah. The feast perfectly and precisely reveal who He is and what He has done and what He will do. Easter doesn't reveal Him.
No, sir.
In Easter, you see the shadow of Ishtar, the shadow of bunnies and eggs and sunrise services. Those reveal her. When you see those shadows, you know that those are not the shadows of the Messiah. They are the shadow of a deity known as Ishtar. Somebody asked me last week, said, have you seen down on Highway 72 going out of Scottsboro back toward Gurley, said, have you seen this? And I said, no, I haven't, but the next time I came through, I saw it. So I stopped and I took a picture of this thing, and I just absolutely amazed. And all the signs up now are, not all of them, but a vast majority of them that are up are not about the feast. They're not about Passover. They're not about unleavened bread. They're not about first fruits, which all reveal the death, burial, resurrection. But they're about Easter egg hunts and bunnies. Easter does not reveal Him. That is not a shadow that will show you the Messiah.
No, sir.
Christmas doesn't reveal Him. You see the shadows of Yule logs, evergreens, winter solstice, Santas, mistletoes, and you know that those are not the shadows of the Messiah. Those are the shadow of Mithra. They're the shadows of Saturnalia. They're the shadows of the Druid. But the feast, wow, they show us Messiah. Why should we study them? That's why. Hallelujah. To embrace the feast is to embrace Him. To reject the feast is to reject Him. To ignore them, to be ignorant of them, to close your eyes to them, is to ignore Messiah. Close your eyes to Him and to be ignorant of Him. We embrace the feast that we might know the Messiah. All right. Well, go ahead and stand up.
I see